There is something nobody warns you about when you get older and find yourself living alone. They warn you about the loneliness. They warn you about the quiet. They warn you about the long evenings and the empty chair at the dinner table. But nobody warns you about the other thing, the strange, almost guilty feeling of finally, for the first time in your entire life, being completely free. My name is Eleanor. I am 81 years old. I have lived alone for 13 years. And when people find out, something shifts in their face, a softening, a slight tilt of the head, the look you give someone carrying a weight you wouldn't want. That must be so hard, they say. And I smile and nod because it's easier than explaining the truth. The truth is more complicated than hard. The truth is that this quiet life I'm living, this small, unhurried, deeply private life, is the first one I have ever chosen entirely for myself. And I am still, at 81, learning what that means. When George died, the world moved very quickly around me. Within days my son was on the phone with senior living facilities. My daughter had already mentally redecorated her spare bedroom with me in mind. My oldest friend, bless her heart, had filled my calendar with lunches and errands and social engagements meant to keep me, as she put it, from sinking. Everyone was solving the same problem: how to make sure Eleanor wouldn't be alone. What nobody thought to ask, what nobody even considered, was whether Eleanor wanted to be alone. I did. I had wanted it for years and hadn't known how to say so, or even fully admit it to myself. We had been married for 41 years. 41 years of building a life around someone else's rhythms, someone else's preferences, someone else's noise. George liked the television on from morning until night. He liked a hot meal on the table at precisely 6 o'clock. He liked the windows closed even in summer, the lights bright even in the evenings, the house full of sound. He was not a difficult man. He was a good man. But his way of living and my way of living were not the same, and for 41 years I had forgotten that my way of living existed at all. So when the house went quiet, I won't pretend there wasn't grief. There was. There is still, some mornings, a hollow moment when I reach for the familiar weight of a shared life and find only air. But underneath the grief, rising slowly like something that had been held underwater for a very long time, was relief. And I could not say that out loud. Not then. Maybe not for years. Because who tells people they feel relieved? Who admits that the silence in the house feels less like loss and more like room to breathe? I kept that to myself and went about doing what everyone expected. I said yes to the lunches. I joined a garden club that met on Thursday mornings, full of perfectly kind women who talked mostly about their grandchildren and their knee surgeries. I went to my church's grief group and sat in a circle of folding chairs and nodded at the right moments. I kept myself moving. I kept myself scheduled. I kept myself, in every outward sense, occupied. And I was miserable in a way that confused me, because I was never alone and yet I had never felt more lonely in my life. That is a particular kind of exhaustion, the exhaustion of being surrounded by people and feeling invisible among them. Of performing wellness for an audience that needed you to be okay. Then one Tuesday morning, a woman from the garden club called to ask if I'd join them for a special outing, a botanical garden, a lunch, the whole day. And I opened my mouth to say yes, because that's what I always did, and instead I heard myself say, "Thank you so much, but I think I'll stay home." No explanation. No elaborate excuse. Just no. I put the phone down and stood in my kitchen and waited for the guilt to arrive. But it didn't come. What came instead was a feeling I barely recognized, relief, light and clean, moving through me like a window opened after a long winter. And I thought, oh, this is what I actually need. That moment was the beginning of something I didn't have words for yet. I started paying attention. Not to what I was supposed to want, but to what I actually wanted when nobody was watching, when no one needed an answer, when the only person I had to satisfy was myself. And what I found was quiet. What I found was mornings. I found that I had never, in 41 years of marriage and decades before that of family and obligation, sat in my own kitchen in the early light without needing to be somewhere or do something or speak to someone. I started doing it every day. Just sitting. Coffee going cold in the mug. Birds at the window. Nothing demanded of me by anyone. George had always needed motion. If he saw me sitting still, he'd appear in the doorway with a project, a question, a task that needed doing. Not unkindly, just restlessly. But he was gone, and I could sit in my kitchen at 7 in the morning and watch the light change on the floor and think thoughts that belonged entirely to me and take as long as I needed to finish them. I rearranged the living room furniture, something George would never have permitted. I moved my reading chair near the east window where the morning sun came in. I started eating dinner at whatever hour I felt hungry, sometimes 8 o'clock, sometimes not until 9, a thing that would have seemed almost scandalous a few years before. Small freedoms. Small recoveries of self. But they added up, slowly, into something that felt more and more like a life I recognized. Here is the first thing nobody tells you about living alone after a long life shared with others: you have to reintroduce yourself to yourself. You have to sit with the quiet long enough to hear what it's actually saying. And sometimes what it says is that you are a person who prefers mornings to evenings, solitude to small talk, one good book to a room full of conversation. You may have always been that person. You may never have had the space to find out. I want to talk about connection now, because that is the piece people worry about most when they hear that someone lives alone. They imagine a kind of cut-offness. A grey, sealed-in existence. And I tried, for a long time, to fight that image by staying busy with groups and gatherings and activities that were supposed to keep me connected. A painting class. A bridge group that met on Friday afternoons. A monthly potluck hosted by women from my neighborhood, full of cheerful noise and casseroles I ate without tasting. None of it reached me. I would sit in those rooms and smile and participate and go home feeling hollower than when I left. And for a long time I thought that meant something was broken in me, that I had lost the ability to connect, that grief had sealed something shut that used to be open. And then I went to the hardware store. This is not a dramatic story. Nothing dramatic happened. I went to buy light bulbs on a Wednesday afternoon, and the man at the register, older gentleman, reading glasses on a cord around his neck, looked up and said, "You were in here last month. You bought the same kind." That was everything. He'd remembered me. 2 visits, 2 months apart, and I had left enough of an impression to be recognized. I walked to my car and sat there for a moment because something in my chest had shifted. Not dramatically. Just a small, warm settling. I existed in that man's world in a small but real way. He had seen me. I started noticing where else I was seen. The woman who runs the dry cleaner on the corner always asks about my garden in summer. The postal carrier, a young man with a kind face, leaves packages inside my screen door without being asked. My neighbor across the street, who is raising her grandchildren and always looks slightly overwhelmed, waves to me every morning with an expression that seems genuinely glad I'm there. My younger sister calls every Sunday evening at 5 o'clock, without fail, has done for years. I used to take these things for granted, or not notice them at all. I had been looking for big connection, the book club kind, the organized friendship kind, and missing the kind that was already woven into my ordinary days. That is the second thing nobody tells you. Connection doesn't always look like what you expect. It doesn't arrive in scheduled meetings or social clubs or organized outings. Sometimes it's the man at the hardware store who remembers your face. Sometimes it's the granddaughter next door who brings you a cookie when she makes them in her home economics class and stands at your door wanting to know if it tastes right. Sometimes it's just being a recognizable presence in someone's daily life, someone they'd notice the absence of. That is real. That counts. But I have to be honest with you, because I said I would be. There was a stretch, maybe a year and a half into my life alone, when the peace I had worked so hard to find began to feel like something else. Not loneliness, exactly. Not unhappiness. More like weightlessness of the wrong kind. I had no anchor. I would wake in the morning and the day would stretch out ahead of me, beautiful in its emptiness and also, terrifyingly without purpose. I did the things I had come to love. I made my coffee and sat by the window and watched the birds and read my book and went for my walk. But it began to feel like I was simply moving through scenes in a film with no plot. One day following another, each one ending and the next one beginning, and none of it adding up to anything that felt necessary. I had peace. What I did not have was a reason. I found it unexpectedly, the way you find most things that matter. My neighbor 2 doors down, a woman in her late 30s, recently divorced, working full-time and raising her son alone, came to my door one Saturday afternoon looking defeated. She had been called into work the following week for a training that ran until 6 in the evening. Her son, a serious, quiet boy named Miles who was 8 years old, got out of school at 3. She had no one to ask. She didn't know me well enough to ask. She was at my door to ask if I knew anyone who might help, not yet brave enough to ask if I would. I said I would. The following Wednesday I walked to the school at 3 o'clock. Miles came out and looked at me with the careful, assessing gaze of a child who has learned to be cautious with new people. I told him his mother had sent me. We walked home, and at first he said almost nothing. But about halfway there he asked me what kind of tree that was. He was pointing at a large oak at the edge of someone's yard, and I told him, and he said, "How do you know?" And I said I'd learned when I was young and had never forgotten. He seemed to find this satisfying. By the time we reached his house he had asked me 4 more questions about 4 other trees. His mother started leaving a small meal on my porch twice a week. Nothing asked for. Just a quiet reciprocation. Miles began stopping by on Saturday mornings to look at the bird feeder in my yard. He wanted to know the names of the birds, what they ate, why some came in winter and some only in summer. I got out an old field guide I'd had for years and we sat at my kitchen table and looked at the pictures. He was serious about it. He took notes. He came back the following Saturday to compare notes. I had a reason to get up. A small one. A quiet one. Not a grand purpose, not a mission or a legacy or anything that would look impressive from the outside. Just a child who would be standing at my kitchen table on Saturday morning wanting to know the difference between a nuthatch and a chickadee. Just a neighbor who no longer had to panic about childcare. Just a simple thread of being needed, running through my ordinary days, holding everything together in a way I hadn't even known was missing until I felt it again. That is the third thing nobody tells you. Purpose at this stage of life is rarely dramatic. It does not announce itself. It comes in through the side door, wearing ordinary clothes, asking small questions. It is the child who needs walking home. The neighbor who needs a meal delivered when she is sick. The friend who calls on Sunday not because she has to but because you are the one she wants to talk to. These things are not small. They only look small from far away. Up close they are the entire point. I will not tell you that living alone is without difficulty. I won't pretend that every evening is peaceful, that every morning is enough, that the missing never shows up and sits down across from you at the table. It does. Grief is not a thing you complete. It comes and goes on its own schedule and you learn, eventually, to make room for it without letting it take over the house. Some winter evenings are very long. Some holidays arrive like weather you didn't check the forecast for and you find yourself not quite ready. That happens. That is part of it. But loneliness, true loneliness, the deep kind, is not about being alone. I know that now in a way I could not have understood when I was younger. Loneliness is about invisibility. It's about moving through the world and leaving no impression, mattering to no one, being noticed by no one. And I am not invisible. I matter to Miles, who is learning the names of birds at my kitchen table. I matter to his mother, who leaves soup on my porch as a way of saying thank you without making it too large. I matter to my sister, who calls every Sunday and tells me things she doesn't tell anyone else, and I understand what it means to be the person someone trusts with the things they can't say out loud. I matter in small ways. But I matter. And that, I have come to understand, is not a consolation prize. That is the whole of it. My house is quiet tonight. It has been quiet for 13 years. From the outside, I imagine that looks like loss. I understand why people think that. But I wish I could show you what it looks like from the inside, the morning light coming through the east window, the birds at the feeder, the cup of tea I didn't have to share, the book left open on the table, the slow and unhurried hours belonging entirely to me. I wish I could show you Miles at my kitchen table with his field guide and his notebook, asking his serious questions. I wish you could hear my sister's voice on Sunday evenings, familiar as breathing, and feel what it is to be known by someone completely. I spent most of my life living for others. I do not say that with resentment. I loved the life I built. But this life, this quiet, small, entirely mine life, is something I did not know I was allowed to want. Something I did not know could feel this much like wholeness. I got here at 81. Some of you may get here sooner. If you are younger and watching this, thinking about what comes next, let me tell you this: do not be afraid of the quiet. Do not let people rush you into noise you don't need. The silence is not empty. It is full of things you have not yet had the chance to hear. And if you are already there, already living in the quiet, already learning your own rhythms for the first time, then you know. You know what I mean when I say that this is not a diminished life. This is a clarified one. Thank you for sitting with me today. I know my life looks simple from the outside. But from where I am sitting, with the morning coming in through the window and Miles due on Saturday and my sister's voice still warm in my memory from last Sunday evening, it looks like exactly enough. It looks like mine.